What's up, everyone? So I'm going to be going over the Manson Family Album and how it became Portrait of an American Family. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Manson Family Album, also known as Portrait ... before, in quotations, the before meaning Reznor, was the intended debut album that was going to be released, under Interscope after Trent had fought hard. So one thing is a big misconception, for example, with the Pre-Reznor is that a lot of people think that Reznor was involved in the production of the Manson Family Album, which he wasn't. He was obviously involved in Manson's life ever since Manson interviewed Trent in for the 25th Parallel magazine back in '89. So Trent Reznor has always been, involved in Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids up until they shortened the name to just Marilyn Manson. So with that out of the way, so Trent was in the picture, but as far as the album itself, Manson himself chose Roli to produce the album. Now, the album is virtually, apart from like the order of the tracks, it's virtually the same as Portrait of an American Family. One difference is what you just heard on the intro, that song Filth, that was not included on Portrait of an American Family. And the song Wrapped in Plastic, which is on Portrait of an American Family, isn't on the Manson Family album. But apart from that, everything's the same as far as songs. Now, a lot of people have also, said things like they can't really hear much of a difference. Well, that can be explained easily. Well, first and foremost, apart from Sarah Lee Lucas not performing live drums as he did on the Manson Family album, it's the same musicians playing the same songs. So obviously they're going to sound the same. But if you are a musician yourself, or you have a good ear, the differences are really, clear. For example, a lot of people wrongly assume that Cake and Sodomy, nothing was changed, it wasn't re-recorded. It's in a completely different tuning. So you can just compare those. That just is just one example. Additionally, samples are in different places. Daisy himself, who I had known from 2005 up until his passing of stage 4 cancer in 2017, would constantly talk about how he himself didn't really see the point in having to re-record the material. He was pretty content with how the Manson Family album sounded. Now, I got mine personally from his. If you were close to Scott, better known as Daisy, then you would know he's an extremely humble, awesome person. Well, he was, and he lives on through everyone he's impacted. But yeah, he would send you anything if you were cool, and whatnot. But it first was released by him in cassette form, which he had, and he had it labeled as Portrait, and then ... before in parentheses. But that was the Manson Family album, which was the intended debut. Now, like I said in my quick update video, Manson originally chose Roli because he liked the work he had done on previous albums he enjoyed. However, when it came to hearing the Manson Family album, he touched upon it in his autobiography, but others like Scott, Daisy, Brad, Gidget, have also touched upon it in more depth. So Manson found that it was too polished, too pop sounding, too mainstream, and he was hoping that Roli instead would have made it sound more dark and more raw, which is kind of ironic because later on, especially during Antichrist Superstar and, moving forward, the sound definitely became very polished, very mainstream. But at the time, Manson was unhappy with it. So Trent felt the same way. He felt, like basically that he could do it better. So originally, the plan was not to re record anything, but just to have like Trent, like basically take over production and, mix and master what had already been recorded, which leads to another misconception that only the drum tracks weren't syncing up. It was more than the drum tracks. There were other things that weren't lining up, such as bass tracks, guitar tracks. Some vocals were salvaged, some guitar tracks were salvaged, but for the most part, virtually everything was re-recorded. All bass, by the way, this is another huge common misconception, is that the bass wasn't re-recorded and that Gidget did not go to LA to re-record. Now, that misconception perhaps originated with the fact that at first Manson was, flown to LA with Trent to work on everything. And then when that didn't happen, I believe it was Daisy who came next. But afterwards, Brad Stewart, Gidget Geen, he definitely went to LA. He spoke about it in many interviews. In fact, it was actually in LA when he actually really, really relapsed, and he made several comments in several public interviews about how he was extremely under the influence during the re-recording all of the bass tracks, but he did a great job, apart from that. Another thing worth mentioning is at the time, Brad didn't mind re-recording his bass tracks at all. He also didn't have an issue with the Manson Family Album, but, it was what it was. But when Portrait came out, as I'm sure most people know, Gidget was replaced by Twiggy Ramirez, Geordie White. So Gidget has made comments that when Portrait first came out, he hated it. And he listed a few reasons, but the main reason was that he felt it sounded too much like a Nine Inch Nails product, mainly due to the programmed drums. And he had made clear several times, he wasn't a Nine Inch Nails fan at all. That wasn't his type of music. That was Brian's type of music. So he just did not like the sound at all when it first came out. But I'm thinking, at least putting myself in his position, I would hate the album too if I was on the album and, I was still credited, but the photos, showed someone completely different in the background, that being Twiggy. So I'm not sure if that had something to do with his hatred towards the album initially, but later on he began to love the album, and later on he would somewhat reconcile with Manson, performing in the Saint music video from the Golden Age of Grotesque. So at some point they did make some sort of amends. However, I don't think that really amounted to anything, as there was never any collaboration moving forward afterwards, which is something I think that Brad hoped for, which never happened. But back to the Manson Family Album. Apart from Lunchbox, Scott had to re-record everything for the most part, which really annoyed him. He would talk about it constantly. He really didn't see the point. Now, as I also mentioned, I really want to get the answers as to the drums. Now, as Gidget said, the choice in the program drums was, in his mind at least, was, to make it more industrial sounding, but they weren't industrial sounding drums by any means. They, were basic MIDI drums that at the time sounded realistic, but now pale in comparison to, the most basic MIDI drums you can find. So I'm not sure, but I am talking to Sarah Lee Lucas. As I mentioned, like, we haven't talked about anything music related, apart from reminiscing and talking about Scott. But I will ask him, like, what was the deal with the whole drum situation. We did talk about the Manson Family Album. Like, he asked me if Scott had talked about it, which he did many times. But for me, I'm a multi-instrumentalist, but drums and percussion are what I excel at and, is my main passion out of every instrument. But for me, I really prefer the Manson Family Album Roli mix, just for the fact that it includes real drums. And, for people, claiming that Sarah Lee Lucas couldn't play or record to a click or whatever, that's not true at all. There are tons of, you can listen to the whole album is on my channel. You can also find it, the album in its entirety, on elsewhere on YouTube. But he could play. I have videos on my channel of him playing great, so live as well. So there was no issue whatsoever on why he couldn't have redone the drums. That's something I'm going to be asking him. But, the decision was made to have the drums programmed. He is credited in programming the drums. So I'm not sure if he's just credited because they, copied some of his drumming, but then again, you have to remember a lot of the songs off of the Manson Family Album and Portrait were songs pre Sarah Lee Lucas, when it was just a drum machine, and Scott was doing all of the programming on that. So I hope that clears a lot of misconceptions up, because a lot of people think that Gidget didn't go back to LA. He re-recorded everything apart from Lunchbox. Now, the intro that ended up on Portrait, for Lunchbox, like the quick intro right before the I Bring You sample, that was done by Trent. But apart from that, everything else is the same. So that was able to be salvaged. But, songs such as Organ Grinder, it's at a much slower tempo. Songs such as Dope Hat, completely different. Songs such as Get Your Gun, a lot more guitar, a lot more, daisy noise, as I guess you could put it. In the song Cake and Sodomy, for example, which a lot of people have said they can't tell a difference. Well, apart from it being in a different tuning, the harmonics in verse 1 are different. If you have a really close ear, you can tell that the bends and the tremolo and etc. during verse 2 are different. But I mean, they're still the same songs, same musicians, apart from on what ended up being the debut, having, fake MIDI drums. It's still the same, so they are going to sound the same. Now, as I mentioned before, some people aren't aware of these pre-Reznor mixes, so they're hearing them for the first time. But for the people that have heard both, I'd say it's 50-50 on what people prefer more. I know that there are several people who would go with the Trent version, which is great. Portrait of an American Family today, still, it's one of my favorite albums of all time. But at the same time, I personally feel that the Manson Family album sounds less polished and more raw than Portrait. With the real drums, a heavier guitar tone overall. I really enjoyed the Roli mixes. Now, I like both, so, I'm glad that both exist, but I personally prefer the mixes. Well, I guess I could, the best way to put it is I wish real drums would have been re-recorded for Portrait. Then I don't think there would be any issue. And I also wish Filth was included, because that song's just incredible. Now, the sessions, the Manson Family album, that was recorded in North Miami in Criteria Studios between July and August of 1993. And then later on, went out to LA, and then Portrait was released in 94 as the debut album we all know. And it wasn't really until Smells Like Children was released and Sweet Dreams dropped and hit MTV that the band really took off. And then with Antichrist Superstar, just international, worldwide. But I had all of the songs on the channel listed as, insert song title and then in parentheses Pre-Reznor, but I realized that could lead to some confusion, as Reznor was always in the picture, up until Antichrist, but he had nothing to do with the production, the mixing, and the mastering of the Manson Family album. That's why I changed the titles to Pre-Reznor Production. It wasn't until, Manson and Reznor both were unhappy with the product that Trent was like, he himself took it on and was like, I'll just take care of this, and do it. And with things not lining up and just basically overall, just the way things ended up happening, a lot was re-recorded it, and for Gidget's case, like everything, rest in peace to both Gidget and Daisy. Again, that is something I'd like to ask Fred about, Sarah Lee Lucas, about the drums. But I hope that explains everything, the differences, the reasoning, the misconceptions. Again, another misconception that some people might have is that Twiggy performed on Portrait due to his photo being in the album booklet, but no, the liner notes say, Gidget Geen, and then list Twiggy, I believe, as live bassist. But Gidget did go to LA and re-record everything, and that's really when he relapsed. So, with that said, That's the Manson Family Album explained. When I figure out, what went on with the drums from Sarah Lee Lucas's point of view, I'll make another video on that. But that's all for now.